Hi, today we're going to take a look at my React and Redux portfolio project entitled Droplet for Reddit. So Droplet is intended to be a kind of a custom Reddit feed, if you will, using React Redux as a front end and a Rails API as the back end, and of course leveraging the Reddit API itself from that back end. So what we're going to do today is just take a look at some of the functionality of Droplet, take a look at the user experience and some of the current features of it, and then we'll backtrack and then talk through the code and some of the things happening in the background. So we'll go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do first here, just for the sake of the example, is create a kind of a test account here. So this doesn't really matter right now. We're not doing any sort of email validation. So we're just going to go ahead and just create a fake email, fake password for now. Hit submit. So you'll see here we've been brought to a new page asking us to link the Reddit account. Because of the way the Reddit API works and what we're doing here, like I said, this is kind of a two-part process. So a user creates a Droplet account with minimal information, and then in order to use the current functionality, you will have to either link an existing Reddit account or create one if you don't already have one. Once that happens, this link is going to kick off the OAuth process to link that account. And then we'll fill out the rest of your user profile and allow you to use some of the functionality of Droplet, which again is a custom feed of subreddits of your choice if you're familiar with Reddit already. So we'll go ahead and link the Reddit account that we've set up for these purposes. So here we've been redirected to Reddit's authorization page. So here it's showing you the permissions that are being requested by Droplet itself, what it would like to do. So if you allow this to happen, we're going to get sent back to the callback URL, which will route us back to the home page, as you can see here. So a quick load happening, and then we're redirected to the home page itself. So on the home page here, you'll see a list of Bootstrap cards. What these are at the time that this page is loaded or called. We are sending a request to Reddit for the top 100 popular subreddits at that moment. So if you refresh, and if anything's changed, you'll see that change reflected here. And these are just kind of arranged in a card fashion, stacking card fashion. So you can take a look here. Right now it's set to retrieve the maximum that Reddit permits is 100 of them. So you'll see 100 cards here. This can be tweaked in the future, but this kind of gives you a little diversity right now, since there currently is not a function to search by name and add or specify the ones that you want to add. Anything right now that is deemed as not safe for work has a red button, just to let you know that. Reddit unfortunately does not allow you to filter those out through the API unless your account itself is set to under 18. So right now you're just seeing the 100 most popular subreddits at the moment that this was pulled. So what we can do here, since this is a brand new account and nothing's been set up, you'll see that these all have an option to add them to the feed. So we'll just go ahead and add a couple here. So ask Reddit. The nice thing with all these cards is you get to see what the name of it is and their description from the subreddit itself, just see an idea of what it is. Let's go ahead and add games, science, NBA. So you can see as these are getting added, the buttons are responsive and changing to give you the option to remove them from your feed if you wish. Say we clicked NBA in error and we don't really want that on our feed, we can either do that from here. That is no longer in the feed. Or you can go to your profile, which will show you your Reddit account information. Here's your Reddit username that was linked from that linked account, the email that you signed up to Droplet with, and then here's the current feed. So ask Reddit, games, and science. If you remember, we also added NBA in error, so we removed that from the other page, but we can do the same thing here, right? So let's say we didn't want science. Now our feed only has these two. You'll also notice here there's some account actions just showing you the status of your account, whether or not it has been linked. If you have not linked an account yet, you will be redirected back to this page and you will not be able to proceed with anything else until you do so. Of course, if you'd like to delete your account, you can also do that here with the click of a button. Right now, that's just a one and done. There's not a confirmation set up on that quite yet, but it is a functioning feature. So we'll just go back here. We are looking at some of these cards. So Ask Reddit and games are currently the only two things that we have added to this. Today I Learned is always fun, and why not, gaming and movies. So we've added a couple here. Again, if you wanted to check what has been added, you can take a look at your Droplet feed. This will just show you your full customized feed. Once you've done that, you can either click this Get Started button or open up this collapsible sidebar menu and just go to Feed. And this will take you to the post page, right? So you see we've been navigated to the post route. And now using the options from your custom feed, we are pulling the 100 or a collection of 100 posts from those specified Reddits. I think they're currently the top posts in each of those, and they're kind of mingled in together and ordered in that way. So you see here, still some minor things we need to fill in with some of the Reddit default thumbnails that are proprietary to them, so we'll need to replace those. But you can see we are using thumbnails, or for ones where they're not available, just a quick Droplet logo. So again, this will pull the max limit of 100 posts at any given time. So at the time that this is accessed, it's the 100 top posts from those subreddits that make up your feed. And you can scroll through here and you'll see that we've rendered out a list of each and every one of these. So a couple things that you'll notice with these: post title, a link to its page if it has like an image or an external link. You'll see the subreddit that it came from and who it was posted by, as well as a comment count, number of upvotes, and how many times it's been gilded. So currently it's a summation of all the gildings that's happened. It doesn't break it out like the Reddit website does, where you may see like gold, silver, bronze. So this is just kind of like a collective count of how many times it has been gilded. So with any of these right now, we have a list of all these posts kind of sorted out into this classic view. So what will happen is if you click any of these, it's going to pop up that post in a modal, at which point it will fetch the comments for that as well. So we'll just take a look here at the first one, Portal Mirrors. You'll see we had a little loading screen there, title of the post, the content of it. So this one was an image, and again, how many times it's been upvoted and who it was posted by and what subreddit. And then you'll see here with that little loading screen, what we've done is we fetched the top or the 100 top comments from that post at the time it was fetched. So at this time, it does not include the comment trees. This is only pulling the parent comments. So these are all unique comments. There are no responses included at this time, but that is going to be a future functionality where we look to incorporate those comment trees. But here you'll see username, how many points that comment has, and then the content of the comment itself. And again, Reddit allows you to pull up to 100 at any given time. That is the maximum for a lot of things like post comments, whatever it may be that you can pull. So here you can scroll down. These are 100 comments. If it's any less than that, it'll just render up to whatever has been added to it. So yeah, there has been some different styling on these. That one in particular was an image. If we can find a video, this one's just a link. In some cases, it will just use the Droplet logo as a placeholder. That is something that there's going to be some additional logic incorporated into to make sure that when there's no content or no text body, it's not going to load a placeholder. That placeholder is mainly intended for images or things that don't load properly. So just want to see if we can get some additional examples here. So again, external link. External link. So you'll see like if there's a text body, it will load the text body. If there's a video, there is also a working embedded video player that's taken from the post information fetched from Reddit that will display properly in here. So you can see with this, one of these broken links thumbnail currently is not working that's presented from YouTube, but the video embed is working. Here you'll see video sound is working. So apologies if that was a little loud, but same thing here, comments have been loaded in. So at this time, this covers the current functionality of Droplet. There will be more to come in the future, but for right now, this is kind of like an MVP working product for what we have. One other thing to point out is we were talking about creating a custom feed. If you remove everything from feed, or if you have not set up a feed yet, what it's going to do is it's going to fetch the best page by default, which is also something Reddit does. So here you'll just get kind of like the front page view that you'd get if you went to Reddit itself without any sort of custom feed setup. So this is kind of like that front page view. And again, this is dynamic, so it loads at the time, or pulls everything that was there at the time that the data was fetched. We do have a little bit of persistence baked in here, so if a user does manually refresh this, since it is a single page application, we are able to keep their information present and still perform that fetch without having to force them to log back in. So that really covers the functionality that's currently in Droplet. Logging, log out, that is there as well. So just some basic things that you'd expect from a web application. At this point, we really just want to make sure that we look to add some additional functionality, but now we'll take a look at some of the code and design decisions made here. So one of the biggest challenges with this was from that authorization authentication standpoint, especially using the Reddit API. The Reddit API is not the easiest thing to use, especially if you're not using Python. If you are a Python user, there is a very convenient wrapper for the API called P-R-A-W, which is a Python for Reddit wrapper, and it takes care of pretty much everything for you. You don't have to worry about the setup, and it streamlines some of the calls. So that was certainly a challenge making this work with Rails, especially considering that there's no official provider for OmniAuth, which also made that a little bit of a challenge. There is one Reddit strategy out there, but unfortunately it's not very well maintained. I don't think it has been touched in the last year or two. So fortunately it does still work, but it did take some tweaking. And we had to add some custom things in here. So we'll kind of take a look at that authentication authorization flow right now. So when a user first visits Droplet, you'll see we have sign up login forms. Each of these are tied to a list of user actions that are stored in the Redux store. So just to cover the front end real quick. So from like our top level index, when we're creating that store, we do have a root reducer that is making use of the combined reducer function, and we have several different reducers that that go into that. You'll see here comments, errors, posts, subreddits, users that all incorporate this combined reducer's output. Plenty of individual cases here too for handling those actions. Again, user, subreddit, post actions, error actions, common actions, all make that up. So for our user actions, when we sign up a user, so we're making heavy use of Axios, which is a very helpful gem for this kind of thing. It takes out that middle layer, or that first promise that you would typically have to resolve like a fetch. So it definitely makes that a little easier and gives you some more easily accessible and customizable settings than your fetch API would. So here you'll see just from the get-go when a user fills that out, we are updating a local state in the sign up container, which is where all that logic is contained for the sign up process. So we're using some local state, updating that as the user enters that information, and then on submit, we'll pass that into the sign up user action that we were just taking a look at. So just to jump back here, when we sign up a user, we're going to take those results and JSONify them with the JSON.stringify method, so we can pass that in to the body of our GET request, or sorry, post request. You'll see here that because we are using JWT tokens as an authorization method between the front end and the Rails API backend, for now, because we were setting up a user, obviously they don't have a token yet, that is null, so we're not passing in a bearer token at this time. So here we are going to create an Axios post request to the API at the users function. So that we're going to hit that create action of the users controller. From our users controller, we'll just jump over there and take a quick look here. So we will create a base user from that information passed over, as long as the passwords match, which is a kind of a custom filter we put in there just to make sure that's fine. So if that's good, we'll save it. We'll create a preference setting as a default right from the get-go. And then if that saves, we're creating our JWT token with an encrypt method. And then we're going to render that back and send it back to the front end. So here you can see we're rendering the current user, which is going to flow through our serializer just to pass the information back that we want to pass back. Preferences, so we're going to send over that setting ID. This is just something that we'll use to fetch that feed. in the interaction between the front and back ends, and then we're passing through that JWT token as well, which is going to get stored into session storage for now. In the future, I'd like to incorporate that into HTTP only cookies, but for now we are making use of session storage. So this gets sent back over, and then you'll see here in our promise, we'll take that information. We are going to set a couple things in session storage. So a logged in status, so if they are logged in, just indicates that there is a user logged in rather than storing like the actual user's information. We are going to store that JWT token that contains an ID, and that will just be used just to make sure that the user is who they say they are between the front and the back when those interactions are happening. And then we're also setting the preference setting, so that again just lets us fetch the feed and load that every time we need to. So here we're just setting off a set user. So this is just where the information is going to get set in state in that user field for the rest of the containers, components, and what have you to make use of it. We do have a error handling method here. So if there are any form errors when a user signs up, so just to do another random one here. So passwords obviously too short, don't match. Passwords must match, right? Or if we have, yeah. So errors do get passed back to that and handled that way. And then when the component unmounts, it will erase those errors just so they don't get persisted across. But yeah. So once that happens, so we're going to go ahead and just take a look at that account we had already created and linked previously. So when a user links their Reddit account, a couple different things are happening there. So this is, I think, a fairly complex process just to figure out with some of the documentation issues and some clarity that was needed in certain areas since we're not using the PRA client. But yeah, so what's going to happen is a user will click that link, as you saw earlier, to link their Reddit account. When that happens, we're making use of a custom action called link Reddit account. So here we talked about those tokens. So here we are setting that token in just so the Rails API knows that it is an authorized user. And then here, just for the purposes of kind of this portfolio project, there was one fetch call. Otherwise, I'd be using Axios, but same idea here, right? We just have to deal with that initial promise rather than it being handled by Axios. But so we're going to be making a fetch request to the link OAuth route, which is a custom OAuth route that handles that linking. So we'll just take a look at the Rails API again. Link OAuth right here. So the Reddit API requires a state token, and it's not something they use, but it's something that you're intended to use just to verify that they are who they say they are. So we do temporarily store that just to make sure that, kind of like a handshake, that they are who they are, right? So here we'll update the current user with that information. Current user, again, is taking that information from the JWT token that gets passed through. It gets decrypted, and if everything matches up, then current user gets set. Otherwise, they will be rejected back before any of this happens. So here we are building a custom query to Reddit's specifications. So this has to happen as the first step in order to obtain an access token. So a couple things happening here. Obviously, we're referencing our client ID and client secret ID. Pretty standard for APIs. Response type of code. Duration is permanent. It says permanent, but it really allows you to do 1 hour tokens with refresh tokens. So it'll provide you with a refresh token that you'll have to refresh essentially every hour. State, here's that state token we were talking about, and then scope is all the access permissions that you would like the user to approve. Here's the authorization URL for Reddit that we need to pass through, and then we're going to render this information back to the React front end, which will get handled in that promise. So once we get that information back, we'll set the window location to that URL with those params, at which point the user will be directed to the Reddit authorization page. And if they choose to provide us with permission, they'll get sent to our callback URL, which will get caught by our Rails API in our OmniAuth callbacks controller, dealing specifically with Reddit. So here, if everything matches up with the state token again, then we will update them rather than create. We've already created an account, so we don't need to create a new account, but rather we'll update it and fill in the blanks with the information that's provided back from Reddit. I believe I spoke to it earlier, but unfortunately they do not provide emails, so it makes it a little difficult to get like a full account's worth of information just from using the API itself. So that's why we handle it in this two-step process where we link an account. If everything's good, we'll set a link status to true, which is something that's saved on the user table. Just let us know that they have indeed linked an account successfully, and then we'll redirect them back to the home page of our front end. If we get caught by the front end, and from there they're good to go. So that's where you saw that we got kicked off to the home page that had all the subreddit cards for users to start building out their feed. So from there, when the home page or home component gets mounted, home container gets mounted, we're going to shoot off an action that will fetch those subreddits that then makes use of the home container to then load all the subreddit cards. So see here we have a subreddit card list. So from home, we're rendering the subreddit display component. So from subreddit display, that's where we hit this, then we're rendering subreddit list with the information that's returned from that fetch subreddit's action and stored in state. So you can see with our subreddit reducer, when we load those, we set it into an array that contains all those objects that are returned back from the API, and that's where we're going to then render individual cards, or those individual cards that you saw on the home page here. So using a couple of stateless functional components, presentational components to handle the rendering of each of those individual cards. Same thing with posts. So when a user has set up their feed, we are going to send something off to our Rails backend, our Rails API. So we have one if-else statement in here. So what's going to happen is if the user has not set up a feed yet, like we discussed earlier, we are just going to pull the current best, which is like that front page as a default. We'll pull the 100 most recent. Otherwise, if they do have a feed, we are pulling that in from that preference setting that we set. And then right now we're kind of using the old API format to then kind of build a query string of all the subreddits that comprise that feed, since Reddit currently doesn't have a way to do that with their API. But that will return a list of the 100 most recent subreddits in JSON format that we can then pull and send back to the front end to then be rendered. So same thing we were doing kind of with the subreddit cards there, we will then do with the post, right? So when this post component gets mounted, when they visit that post route, we are fetching the post like we just reviewed. Anytime this updates, we're going to load those posts. So that kind of handles our loading screen there. If no posts have been loaded into that array yet, we'll display a loading functional stateless component. Otherwise, we're going to render the full list of posts, which gets kicked off to our post list component, which is then responsible for rendering each of those individual posts components, again, a stateless functional component here. There's a little more logic that goes into this presentational component because, or sorry, I misspoke. This one is not a stateless functional component because of the modal and some of the things that have to happen with it. You'll see there is quite a bit going on just because of all the different things that the Reddit API could possibly return. Because that content is so dynamic, it's not really nicely bucketed out between like videos, secure videos, GIFs, images, text, whatever it may be. If you're familiar with Reddit, there's a whole slew of things that it could potentially be. So some conditional statements, we may switch this up to like a switch in case type setup in the future, but that's handling that. The thumbnail as well, a couple different things going on there depending on the type of content being returned. And then we are here, you'll see this React fragment. This is handling those individual posts, so that full list you're looking at with the classic container views. So we'll just take a look at this again. So all these are being rendered here, or this is each one of these, and then we also have to incorporate our modal pop-up here within the same post just to handle that. So I'll probably push this off into its own component in the future, but right now it lives within this post component. So when that is clicked, that's what's firing off this modal and telling it to load that information. So you can see there we clicked it. It's been loaded. And then within that, we've also got our comments container embedded. So at the time at that time and only at that time when that post is clicked and that modal is opened, does it mount the comments container. So just looking at the comments container real quick here. Same thing going on here. Anytime it's mounted, it's going to send off an action to fetch those comments. Something very similar is happening there. We're making use of Axios to send a request to the backend, which is then firing off a GET request to Reddit to pull the 100 top comments from the given post that was clicked. And anytime it's unmounted, we clear out those comments just to make sure that that doesn't get persisted between modals when they are opened. Otherwise, we're going to load those, and with each of those, again, we are going to render the comment list component, which will then handle the rendering, or which will handle passing information to the comment component for each of those comments from that list of 100 or up to 100. As you can see here, gets passed down to this very last child comment component, which handles the display of those comments. So just a little bit of styling and structure there, as you're seeing here, but that's really what's going on with that. A little bit of logic happening kind of with our top level application that we hadn't covered yet, but here, so I know there are probably better ways of going about persisting user information in the event of a refresh or state reset. So the way I'm doing this currently is you'll see here with the high level application component, since this is the highest level other than index, the parent component, anytime something happens here, we are checking to see whether or not two things are happening. If there's a logged in status set to true, and if the current user array is empty, we'll fire off a call to authenticate user, which will then take care of fetching the user's information using that JWT token and some of the information that was set there. Because since that is stored in session storage, that does stay there, which allows us to do this. Again, we're not storing the user information itself, just that encrypted ID or encrypted token that will allow us to get that information from the backend and everything matches up properly. So this happens anytime it gets mounted. Again, one challenge here is since all the child components get mounted and handled before the parent does, there was a little bit of a challenge in making that work properly, but we were able to get that to work properly in the end. So that does allow for persistence to a degree. You may see a little bit of a loading delay while that happens until it gets back up to the parent component, but we are able to handle persistence that way. So we're not really hydrating it per se, but this allows us to set up our own version of persistence. So you'll see here, I am currently logged in. This is we did not set a custom feed again, so we'll just do a custom feed again real quick. We'll just add these first three here. Go back over. So custom feed, you'll see here, Marvel, Ask Reddit, Legal Advice. So those are the only three here. We got the 100 posts from those. So what would normally happen is on a page refresh like this, we would lose state since state does not get persisted, and then we'd have to have the user log in again, and it would just cause kind of a inconvenience for the user. But on a reload, I need to incorporate a loading screen so it covers up that default profile like you saw that flashed up there. But once it got back up to the app component, we did do that check. It failed, it returned true. So that's when we fired off authenticate user. And now, as you can see, we are back at our user's feed without having to sign the user back in or ask them to log back in manually. So again, we have Marvel, Ask Reddit, Legal Advice. So as you can see, we do have persistence. Couple other things going on here I just want to touch on. We do have some conditional logic in some of the routers, so we are making use of the React router v4. Couple of the routes do have some conditional logic in them just to handle that user persistence if something happens. So if a user tries to access any of these routes that require a link to Reddit account, they will be kicked back to the profile page. Or if they're logged in, they'll be redirected to the log, or if they're not logged in, rather, they'll be redirected to the login page to then handle that. So this is just how we're making sure that they aren't able to get to a page where they would need access to a Reddit account in order to use that functionality. So in the future, I do want to incorporate a user list functionality so somebody that's not logged in can still see like the best of. But for right now, it does require an account to be linked to use it. So yeah, a couple things happening with some of those routes. Otherwise, the ones that are okay to access without having a Reddit account or being logged in are accessible with minimal logic, as you can see here, like sign up, log in, log out profile. They should be able to get redirected back to that so they can link their account if they are logged in. All these otherwise are making sure that the user is logged in, which we're making use of this logged in function down here just to check the value of that, or just make sure that logged in was stored in session. Currently that does cover everything that has gone into Droplet. So thank you for watching. Have a great day.